Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough, and I'm back at it again with another movie vlog. This time with a recently released movie, but seeing how I watched it on demand, I still don't have to talk about movie theater experiences or trailers or anything like that like I usually do for the few times that I do these recent release videos. But the movie I saw in question was Bill and Ted 3, Bill and Ted Face the Music, and I'm going to say right now, I enjoyed it. Is it a great movie? No. Do I think it's a nice little entry in the Bill and Ted oeuvre? Yes, I do. I think that it definitely captured a lot of the same spirit that the other ones did, which was a little bit of a worry. Because I remember when this movie was first announced, one fear I had was, because somebody I follow shared the trailer when it first came out, and they were like, sarcastically, they were like, oh, for those who liked Dumb and Dumber 2, this is for you. And that had me worried because I love Dumb and Dumber, the first one. The prequel, no. Second one, not so much. And I saw the second one in theaters. And that was what I was worried about. I was worried if this was going to be another, let's just do a sequel because, oh, everyone just loved the original movie, so let's just get the same people to come back, a nice little nostalgia bomb, but, you know, the movie itself isn't very good. And on top of that, I was also worried about it being just another cynical cash grab. We've gotten so many of these where you can just tell that the studio heads, they're clearly studio think tank projects where they just, hey, you know, effort, let's just take things from the past and let's just redo them, okay? Like, well, why even try making new things? Originality, creativity, effort, that's passé, man. That's overrated. We can just take things from the past and just remake them. We don't need to try anymore. That was what I was worried about. And I was like, please don't be like that. But then I found out that it's from the same writers as the first two, and you also have the guys playing Bill and Ted, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves. They were going to be a big part of the production as well, which was, I think, the same case for Bogus Journey, the second movie. And it's good to see that that is the case, because these clearly are passion projects. This was another passion project of theirs. In fact, I remember reading somewhere that they've been trying to work on this for like 10, 15 years or so. So it's like, this definitely did feel like an actually worthy entry versus one of these other just generic sequels or remakes or reboots of classic beloved comedies from like a long time ago. And it's just like, oh yeah, here, just have the same thing again, except it's just a little slightly different, a little more modern. This actually did feel like a worthy entry. It had a lot of the same spirit, a lot of the same optimism that made the original Bill and Ted movies work. Now, that said, just like the Bill and Ted movies before it, if you try to analyze the actual like science and logistics of any of this, it makes almost no sense. Like, there's a bunch of stuff you can point out, and some of which they point out for comedic effect, which we'll get into in a little bit. But as it stands, I think they captured the spirit of Bill and Ted perfectly in this. It's definitely a silly little, we're just here to have fun. We're not here to make some kind of intricate, serious science fiction story. We're just here to have some goofy, lighthearted, zany fun. The same thing you'd expect from a movie where a couple of, you know, dumb high school kids end up taking a bunch of different historical figures out of their time periods and bring them to the present, and it doesn't actually have some kind of serious impact on history. Same kind of mentality here. As for the plot, it takes place like all these years later, and we see that Bill and Ted still have not written the song that is going to unite the world and, you know, make history way better for everything. In this case, the movie begins with them at Missy's wedding, as this time she has now divorced Ted's dad, which she was originally married to Bill's dad in the first movie, and then in the second movie she divorced him and married Ted's dad, and now she's marrying Ted's younger brother Deacon, which, wow, okay. But they try doing a song at the wedding, and of course it's supposed to be not very good, but I mean, give these guys credit, they've learned how to play instruments over time. I mean, and if you're into a very like artsy-fartsy type of song, I thought they actually did pretty well. I mean, they incorporated the theremin. Like, how many songs nowadays incorporate the theremin? I thought that was pretty cool. They also show off their children, who not Little Bill and Little Ted like in the second movie, which they still say that that's like their nicknames, but instead of being sons, they actually have daughters, and they're Billy and Thea, which I thought was cute. And another thing I thought was great was the fact that, just like how this movie highlights the fact that, just like with the other ones, Bill and Ted do literally everything together. Like, even into adulthood. They live next to each other, they go to couples counseling with the princesses together. Like, they do literally everything together. And similarly, their daughters, when they see them, they go, "What's up, dads?" I thought that was funny. Just, it is a cute little thing, just highlighting that, you know, these guys do literally everything together. And their daughters, thankfully, they didn't do something I was worried that they would do, and that was, I was thinking they were going to have some kind of thing about, you know, oh, their daughters are smarter than them and they're not like them. No, their daughters are exactly like them. In fact, they capture their mannerisms perfectly, which sells when we actually talk about their subplot, which we'll get to in a bit. But they're just like them, and they're supportive of their daughters. Like, their daughters are into remixing and making their own kind of versions of their music, and which, that was one thing I called, because they keep bringing up, when they eventually get to the main plot, which is that since they haven't made the song yet, history is about to collapse on itself, and all time and space is going to just collapse in on itself unless they make that song at a, you know, there's a ticking clock element at this specific time, at this specific place. You got to have the song ready. And so from there, they go to the future for a little bit. And this is one thing that kind of irked me. And I know Red Letter Media, I think, pointed this out, that the set design is really uncreative. It's obviously just all on green screen, and they added like all the backgrounds later. It did feel like just a little bit empty. Like, when they're in the future, there's just like big empty spaces of just nothing there. And like, they're walking on this bridge area, and they have the phone booth there as like an artifact from like, oh, this was the time machine that they used to go back in time. And there's also a hologram of Rufus, because instead of Rufus, this time we have Rufus's daughter, played by Kristen Schaal. And she did fine. It did feel a little bit weird. I mean, yeah, George Carlin was a comedian, but he didn't play the character of Rufus comedically. But I thought Kristen Schaal did perfectly fine in the role. And also the fact her name was Kelly, which that's George Carlin's real life daughter. I thought that was a nice touch. So yeah, this council tells them in the future, you guys got to get the song ready at this point in time, and that's what's going to eventually unite the world and save history. Because what happens is, since history is collapsing, you have a bunch of different historical people popping in and out of different areas and different points in history all over time. One of my favorite visual gags is that you see people sailing to America, and since Jesus just pops up, Jesus just walks on water right past them. As I thought that was like one of the funniest visual gags I've ever seen in a while. That was pretty good. So of course, instead of trying to just sit down and write the song themselves, they decide, hey, why don't we just travel through time, and we'll get the song from ourselves some point in the future. And from there, we see a bunch of different future Bill and Teds. There's one where they're just a bunch of losers living in a van playing at some open mic night. And there's a point where there's like these foppish, wannabe British, like glam rock Bill and Teds that live in a mansion, which turns out to be Dave Grohl's. And there's actually a cameo from the man himself. I was so happy about that. Dave Grohl, hell yeah. Yeah, by the way, you get to see Keanu Reeves attempt a British accent again. After Bram Stoker's Dracula, you get to see that again. And their outfits in that whole segment, oh my god. Like I said, it feels like they're trying to imitate like British 80s glam rock. And it's really fun. It's a very funny visual. There's a point in time where they're like really buff and they're in prison. And of course they eventually see themselves when they're older and they're like old men. And they give them a file that has the song on it. Meanwhile, all that's going on, the princesses are traveling through time and seeing all these different points in history where they could potentially be happy with Bill and Ted once again. Because they established that they themselves are disappointed that Bill and Ted have not created the song that brought the world together, and it's starting to affect their marriage. And they keep highlighting when they see the alternate versions of themselves. It's like, yeah, if you don't fix things, your wives are going to leave you. And so that's kind of another element. I kind of wished we highlighted that a little bit more. Like, I kind of wish we saw a little bit of the princess's adventure, because they hop into a phone booth with their future selves and they go traveling through time and seeing all these different outputs. And there's going to be spoilers in this, so yeah, sorry in advance. It ends up that they end up finding the happiest they are with Bill and Ted when they're finally all together, and they end up making the song that brings the world together. And they eventually have an arc where instead of saying "we love you," they finally just say "I love you" to them separately. And very adorably, both of them say "we know," like, oh, now they're doing what they were doing. That's so cute. That felt nice. Like I said, this movie has that like Bill and Ted optimism that I was really hoping that they would recapture, and thankfully they did. And that's the kind of thing we need. Like with these kind of movies, or not even with just these kind of movies. Like at this point, we need a movie that has just completely unbridled, just pure optimism and just no cynicism whatsoever. And this movie just has the right attitude about it, and that's what made me happy. And then we get to the Daughters subplot. The Daughters subplot it's basically kind of a mini remake of the first one, where they're trying to help their dads make the perfect song that will unite the world. So what they do is they are given a time machine by Kelly, Rufus's daughter, and they go throughout history to get a bunch of different musicians to try and make the perfect band. And you got Mozart, you got Louis Armstrong, Jimi Hendrix, a bunch of different people. That was fun. I thought that subplot, I'm like, man, if that was actually the full movie of them going throughout history, yeah, it'd be kind of a mini remake of the first one. But honestly, I was enjoying that. And those actresses, like I said, they fully captured that Bill and Ted like attitude from the first one perfectly. They did a really good job with that. Then you get to the whole hell aspect, because they tried to connect the whole, going to the afterlife thing, like in Bogus Journey, which I was happy that they didn't just completely forget Bogus Journey, because it seems like over time, Bogus Journey has developed more of a cult audience, which I'm so happy about, because I love Bogus Journey. It's really silly and dumb in certain spots, but that's what makes it great. So yeah, what they do is similar to what the Grim Reaper was in Bogus Journey. They have a robot character who Rufus's wife and Kelly's mom sends back in time to kill Bill and Ted, because she thinks that that'll be the only way to save the world, even though they told them specifically to try and save it. I don't know. Like I said, you really like cannot overanalyze, because then like it's just like, oh, it's just a dumb comedy. So yeah, they send this robot who they eventually name Dennis. He goes back in time, and basically he serves the same purpose that the Grim Reaper did in Bogus Journey, that starts off as an imposing figure, and then gradually he becomes a friend of theirs. And like, he worked for the most part, but there were some times where I was just like, okay, especially now that eventually when they get Grim Reaper to show up, that character to come back, I'm like, okay, we kind of don't need this Dennis character anymore. It's like you're basically... Although there was one part where he wants to be part of the band, and like he's like, can I do a tambourine solo? Come on. Like, he's talking to Death, and Death's like, it's like, the tambourine is a lot harder than you'd think. And then eventually he's like, as they're playing the music, they have to go back to the future and with Kelly, and he's like, oh, I want to stay and dance. I thought that stuff like that was funny. But then there were times where they were definitely just trying to be like, oh, it's just like their relationship with Death in the second one. It's like, yeah, but once you get Death involved, you kind of lose that magic. But he was definitely one of the characters I thought that worked, and I'll get to him in a sec. So they send Dennis back to kill Bill and Ted. He ends up killing the daughters and all the historical figures, Ted's dad, and they all end up in hell. I don't know why they end up in hell, because in Bogus Journey, they got exorcised into hell because Missy saw that they were spirits, thought they were evil, and then put a curse on them that banished them to hell. Why did everyone go to hell? Especially the daughters. What the hell did they do to anybody? Why are they in hell? And also, why was the SWAT car that Bill's dad was in at the time, why did that end up in hell? I know they needed a vehicle, but why? And again, if you ask these questions, then you're just going to be like, it's a Bill and Ted movie. Can't overanalyze this kind of thing. Just can't. So eventually, Bill and Ted, they end up in hell, once Dennis tells them about this. So they end up in hell. This is like one of the parts I told you about where at first I was like, wait, yeah, why is that? And then they kept poking fun at it. It's like, because the robot then tries to self-destruct and he points the laser at himself and he's about to vaporize himself, and then Bill and Ted jump in the way of the laser so that all three of them die, and then they end up in hell. And at first I was like, why is a robot in hell? Like, yeah, I get it, Futurama, it made sense there because it was robot hell. But then they kept pointing it out every time. They're like, is that a robot in hell? Yeah, I think so. That made it actually funny. The fact that they acknowledged how strange that was, that's what saved that whole thing for me. I thought that was great. And that's where they come across Death. And I like the fact that they explain why Death is now working in hell instead of having his own little area like in Bogus Journey. That, like, he's like, I got demoted because I helped two friends to go up there when they weren't supposed to go back up there. I thought that was great. Because it was like, that explains why he's down there. Because he owed a favor to people who somehow beat him endlessly at different games. Oh, that's another thing. When you first see him, he's playing hopscotch, and he's got like a little tetherball stand-up. I thought that was kind of great. And his office was pretty cool. And apparently, the reason that they were for a while on bad terms, Death and Bill and Ted were apparently on bad terms, is because after a while, it seems like fame went to his head. Like, there's a line about him doing 40-minute bass solos and solo projects. Like, I thought that was funny. Stuff like that was really funny. Yeah, and then, of course, their daughters are the ones that convince him. They're like, you were like the coolest bassist to us when we were growing up, dude. And so eventually he's convinced, and they all make up, and then they go back to Earth. And I did see this twist coming from a mile away, because when they visit their old future selves, they are given the case that, like, the little file that says Preston and Logan. Now keep in mind, it doesn't say Bill and Ted, but Preston and Logan Face the Music is the name of the song that'll bring the world together. And that's obviously the title of the movie. And what it turns out being is, it's their daughters, because their daughters got the band together of all these different musicians from Time, including Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi is there for some reason. And he was good. He was pretty funny. But it's just like, oh, Kid Cudi's here. Okay. All right. He's part of the band now. Fine. Very good frontman. Like, as soon as he comes out, he's like, make some noise for Bill and Ted. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. But yeah, it's their daughters who end up saving the day. And awesomely enough, Bill and Ted end up getting their own guitar solo, which I thought was cool. It's like they finally did get to live the dream of creating the song that brought the world together. They did it because their daughters took the initiative to do it. And, together, it wasn't just the band. They end up going throughout history and all space and time, handing people instruments, and the entire world together literally unites to create one perfect song together. And I thought that was another great thing. It's like, that's the kind of optimism that, especially at this point, we need to see. I thought that was great. It's like everyone in the world, makes the one perfect song that saves all time and space. I also felt kind of weird because eventually when they go back to the future, they show Rufus's wife / Kelly's mom, who, need I remind you, sent the killer robot after Bill and Ted to kill them. She just says to Kelly, like, your father would be so proud. I'm like, she technically tried to kill the guys that ended up saving the world. Like, are they not gonna, like, acknowledge that? That felt a little bit weird. But overall, yeah, another minor nitpick, the movie just stops. There is, like, no epilogue. There's an after credits scene that shows, again, spoilers, sorry, that shows old Bill and Ted, and they do a guitar solo together, even in their old age. It's like, that was pretty cool. I kind of wish that was the last scene, that they didn't just save that for after credits. But, the movie just stops. Like, they make the perfect song, time and space is restored, and then there's some voiceover, and they say, their daughters say, yeah, so that's what ended up saving the world. It worked. And then just jumps straight to credits. I'm like, okay, I guess we're done now. All right. fine. So yeah, overall, Bill and Ted Face the Music, this was definitely a very entertaining movie. I was having fun all throughout. It has that just absolutely unbridled enthusiasm and optimism and happy-go-lucky good nature that made the first two very entertaining. And I didn't comment on this. I guess I should. The performances between Bill and Ted themselves, I liked them. I thought they were really good, and after a while, I definitely got more into their performances. Alex Winter, out of the two, I think captured Bill perfectly. I will say this: it is really bizarre seeing Keanu Reeves play Ted again, because we're so used to seeing him, as Neo or as John Wick, especially, in his more recent career. But seeing him try to go back to Ted at first was a little bit a little rusty, but then slowly I got more and more used to it. I was like, okay, yeah, there we go. There's Keanu Reeves as Ted. Alex Winter just jumps right back into the role. What's up, dude? He captured it perfectly, and slowly over time. And even on screen, as a duo, they definitely had the same kind of, again, good-natured energy that made the first two entertaining. So, yeah, that's definitely the big saving grace of this movie, is that it is a lighthearted, happy-go-lucky, well-intentioned sequel, continuation of Bill and Ted. Will this spawn any more other Bill and Ted media? Part of me feels like the answer should be no, but I mean, considering how old these guys are now, I feel like this is a perfectly fine, especially considering we now have it that they saved the world. They finally did create the perfect song. So I feel like now we kind of have that culmination. One thing I find interesting, though, before I wrap this up, one thing I thought was interesting was that the creators had once said that they actually never intended this to be a time travel franchise. They said that they had the idea of that for the first movie, and then that's why in the second movie we had the whole thing of the afterlife, of heaven and hell and death and all that kind of thing. And they said that they never really intended Bill and Ted to be a straightforward time travel franchise series. Kind of makes me wish that maybe they did attempt something a little different for this one. As good as it is, there is kind of they probably could have done some different stuff here. Who knows? Maybe they could have made it an alternate dimension story. Maybe they travel to different realities, and I guess they technically do that with the whole time travel aspect. They say there are infinite realities and infinite timelines of different pasts and different futures. Part of me feels like it would have been cool if they did a whole movie where just them going to different realities and picking up a bunch of different alternate Bill and Teds. That kind of would have been interesting. But like I said, yeah, going back, final thoughts. Very entertaining movie. I had a lot of fun. Not a great movie, but if you enjoy Bill and Ted 1 and 2, this definitely felt like a very welcome addition and very, very charming little movie. So I really enjoyed Bill and Ted Face the Music. As for the next video I'm working on, it's going to be talking about another show about kids going into a video game world. Thankfully, though, it is not the Boom Crew. We already did that. And it is also not that ninja comic, because I also did that. This time, it is one of the original faces, and it's an 80s animated series that a lot of people probably know. It's Captain N, the Game Master. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at that next time. Until then, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough, and party on, dudes!